You can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. For members participating in person or via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The committee clerks and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated speaking order. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Conformément la motion adoptée le 22 septembre.
Pursuant to motion adopted at 22 September 2025, we are undertaking our study of the budgetary cycle 2024 to 2026, and also the motion that was adopted on September 22nd, 25. We are undertaking the consideration of Bill C4, an act respecting certain affordability measures for Canadians and other measures. I would like to welcome the Minister of Finance, the Honourable François Philippe Champagne, and Chris Forbes, ADM. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a privilege to be with you today, and congratulations on being nominated Chair of the committee. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me today. I think it's very important for us to have an open dialogue between the Minister of Finance and the Finance Committee. As you know, C4 contains a variety of good news for Canadians, and I'll go over them with you today. I want to discuss this bill and how the next coming federal budget will fits into the framework of C4.
By a very fast-changing world global order, Canadians have called for a serious plan to address this new economic landscape and the rising cost of living. I said that in a press conference. I think it's the speed, scale, and scope of the change in the world economic order that really mandates that we do things differently in this country. They've asked for change that puts more money in their pockets, change that builds the strongest economy in the G7, change that builds one Canadian economy and not 13. With Bill C4, new government is delivering on that mandate for change, and with our upcoming budget, we will seize upon a generational opportunity to transform the Canadian economy through ambitious investments and a rigorous expense review so that we can spend less and invest more. Notre gouvernement est prêt à bâtir, à protéger, à renforcer.
Our government is ready to build, protect, and strengthen the Canadian economy and empower Canadians throughout the country. This includes ambitious investments in workers and industries and communities in Canada and Quebec.
Consent at second reading, and I want to thank colleagues. There's not much things that go on in this House with unanimous consent, but everyone agreed that this was the right thing to do for Canadians. We have a package of affordability measure for Canadians, which is going to be transformational for our country, and I want to thank all of you for voting in favor of it. From a middle-class tax cut, which is saving money for 22 million Canadians, to eliminating the GST for first-time home buyers on new homes up to $1 million, to removing the federal consumer fuel charge from law. This legislation will put more money in Canadians' pockets. I should also mention, Madam Chair, that we have also heard concerns regarding unintended consequences of the tax cuts on some disability credit recipients, and I can assure you, Madam Chair, that we are working on resolving them. To build upon the momentum of C4, on November 4th, I'll be tabling Budget 2025. Et aujourd'hui, je suis heureux d'informer les députés de
And today I'm pleased to inform members of some fundamental changes to our government's approach to budgeting, which will help us deliver more results for Canadians.
There is a new way forward on budgeting. The global economy has changed, as I said, and Canada must change with it. We're responding with generational investment that build bigger and better at home. The urgency of this moment demands new ways of budget planning, and that's exactly what we're doing. The cornerstone of this new approach is a capital budgeting framework that distinguishes and enables the government to prioritize spending that stimulates public and private sector capital investment versus day-to-day operational spending. This will mean more transparent decision-making and more taxpayer dollars allocated to investment that will grow our economic potential. Going forward, the Government of Canada will also adopt a fall budget cycle, starting with Budget 2025. The fall timing before the main estimates, and I must say before the main estimates, will facilitate the oversight and study of public expenditure for parliamentarians, inherently making the process more transparent. It will also support effective financial planning for federal departments and agencies, provinces and territories, as well as Canadian businesses and organizations, allowing for more informed decision-making on where public funds will have the most impact. This updated budget cycle will more closely align with construction season and provide increased certainty and predictability for businesses and investors. Spring budgets often didn't allow projects to take the full advantage of the construction season. A fall budget cycle changes that, giving builders and investors a real head start. The new fall budget will be followed by a spring economic and fiscal update as the new fiscal year begins, as well as pre-budget consultations over the course of the summer, as we did this year. La tenue de ces consultations pendant
Holding these consultations during the summer will give us more time to develop budgets that better reflect the priorities
and I'm happy to extend by 1 minute, or
Okay.
otherwise
Yeah.
stand there if you want. So, I was just saying, la tenue de ces consultations pendant
Holding these consultations during the summer will give more time to developing budgets that better reflect the priorities of Canadians, as did the recent consultation last July and August, which took place in 26 cities across the country.
We're in fact implementing recommendations made to the government by various parliamentary committees, including the Parliamentary Budget Officer. In conclusion, our government has a plan to build a new Canadian economy, the strongest economy in the G7, and one that works for everyone. C4 was an important first step in that plan, and Budget 2025 will be an historic next step. I look forward to releasing our full plan on November 4th with Budget 2025. Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair, and I look forward to the questions from my colleagues. Merci.
Great. Thank you so much, Minister Champagne. So we will now begin with our rounds of questioning. Mr. Halan, you have 6 minutes for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, what are your fiscal anchors?
Madam Chair, and I'd like to say thank you to the member of the committee. It's a real pleasure to see you. We have been very clear during the campaign that we will be balancing the operating budget in the next 3 years.
That's your fiscal anchor?
That is a fiscal anchor that we have been talking about and
Are
that
there
we
more?
put in the platform.
Are there more?
We said that there will be a declining deficit to GDP over the same period.
Okay, so the deficit to GDP ratio that you're claiming is supposed to decline, the PBO says that he doesn't think so. And he doesn't even think that you have fiscal anchors right now. Is he right?
I would say different parliamentary budget officer have had a different view, I would say, than the one you're referring to now. I would say, Madam Chair, Canadians should rejoice because Canada has a very strong fiscal position. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7.
Minister, you're
we have the lowest
sticking on the
deficit
fiscal-
to GDP ratio in the G7.
sticking on the
and
deficit
we are
to
only
GDP
one of
ratio,
few countries in the G7
your
which has
fiscal
a
to GDP
AAA
ratio
credit rating.
was supposed to be 1%. It's doubled right now. And you're saying that it's supposed to decline. It doesn't look like it's going to decline. You literally, according to the PBO, are going to have 80% higher deficits and the economy is shrinking. So how do you square that? How do you square having higher deficits, a shrinking economy, your deficit to GDP ratio is already double what you claimed it was supposed to be. How is it supposed to decline?
Madam Chair, I have more confidence in Canadians and the Canadian economy perhaps than my colleague. Canada has a very enviable fiscal position. When you look at the G7, Madam Chair, and I attend these meetings, I chair them, you would say that our colleagues would say that Canada has a very stable fiscal position. We have the means of our ambition, and we're going to seize that generational opportunity. Having the lowest debt to GDP ratio and the lowest deficit to GDP ratio in the G7, plus a AAA credit rating, I would argue, and I know you're the official critics for finance, so you would know that, that is a pretty enviable position. Only Germany has a AAA credit rating in the G7, and Canada is one of them.
You know,
we have a
Canada
very strong
has
fiscal
the
position.
fastest shrinking economy in the G7, and saying that we would have the AAA credit rating is almost like a participation ribbon right now for Canadians waiting in food bank lines. because they're the ones who are suffering with your government spending. And again, you didn't answer the question specifically. You're claiming that the deficit to GDP ratio is going to be going down, but there's no specifics. Are you saying that in this fantasy budget that somehow the GDP is going to massively grow at the same time having deficits that are going to be 80% higher than what even Justin Trudeau had, which is surprising?
I think it's pretty offensive for Canadians who are listening this morning to your comments, because Canadians will be reminded that your government,
I'll correct you, Minister, that the
your
PBO
party,
said that about your ratio. He said that your ratio is very alarming, stupefying, shocking, and unsustainable. That's what the PBO said. We agree. Canadians agree. Do you agree?
I would say there is Kevin Page said, and I quote, Madam Chair,
Is the PBO lying?
Madam Chair, do you want me to answer? Otherwise, I'm happy to listen to your question
It was
all
a
day,
yes or
sir.
no answer, Minister.
But if you want me to answer, if you just want to ask the question and the answer, Canadians will
very
form
alarming,
their judgment.
stupefying.
Yes, Mr. Turnbull?
Sure, I know that it's the informal practice at committee, because I've been on many committees, to give the minister at least as much time as it took the member to ask the question, at least. The minister wasn't even able to get the first word out.
On the point of order,
Mr. Kelly?
the minister ran my colleague's clock earlier in the round. I think it works itself out.
Okay,
Mr. Hillan, I'll just ask everyone to maintain a respectful atmosphere. Thank you.
Definitely. Okay, I don't see the minister will answer that, because we all believe the PBO in saying that the finances are unsustainable. Moving on, like you said in your statement, you want to make operational spending, whatever that is, and balance it in 3 years. The Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, tried this failed experiment in the UK last year. It failed horribly, and now you guys are trying to try the same accounting trick here in Canada. When at the end of the day, the bottom line is still the bottom line. I'll quote the PBO and what he's saying for your claims about splitting it between operating and capital costs. The PBO said, "We haven't seen a clear definition of what would fall into capital and would fall into operating." He further said about your operating budget that we currently don't have a definition of operating budget. He went on to say something very alarming. The bottom line of the government will not change, which means debt is still debt at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how many columns you try to present in front of Canadians and try to trick them. He went on to say the international public sector standards that everyone uses to measure the deficit and levels of debt will not change. The first reason that won't change is those are the accounting standards. The second reason is the ratings agencies won't let you change it. That's the first thing they're going to go to. And if they have a sniff that somehow there's a change in presentation, you bet your boots that we're going to be paying more for debt pretty quickly. So you guys are going to try the same failed experiment that Mark Carney advised the UK government on just last year. So are you guys going to be cooking the books, trying to trick Canadians with these tricky accounting practices, or both?
I think, Madam Chair, it's irresponsible for a member of Parliament to use language like that. I will say that. It's irresponsible. Because the member knows full well that we're not replacing anything, we're adding. This is a new lens for people at home to understand.
Would the minister agree debt is debt?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to listen to his question, but if I'm not allowed to respond to the same time, I've been a minister for quite some time in this House. Normally, I have the same time than
That's
the colleague.
That's why it's not a new government.
Canadians deserve to correct the record, because that was an irresponsible statement.
Minister, and thank you, Mr. Hillan. That's time for that round. We're going to move on to Monsieur Letao, please.
Thank you, and welcome, Minister. Welcome, Mr. Forbes. It's very nice to see you here with us this morning. Before beginning, I want to make a comment. The Canadian economy is not
shrinking. Economic growth in 2025 will be plus 1.2%, according to the PBO. That's our esteemed colleague has just mentioned so many times. What has changed, though, is the economic environment. We now live in a much more complex, in a much more uncertain world, which requires a strong adjustment on the part of our government. Therefore, Monsieur le Ministre, que j'aimerais...
Mr. Minister, I'd like to hear you a bit more because you really didn't have enough time before. Given this climate of uncertainty, in this climate of need to change and to put in place measures that will allow us to get through this difficult period, what are the principal measures that you wish to put in place? Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Mr. Littell. You are a well-known economist, former minister from the Quebec government. I certainly appreciate what you have done to contribute to economic growth in the country. But when you look at the fiscal situation that Canada is in, colleagues know when you speak about Canada, Canada is one of the two countries with Germany to have a AAA rating, and which has the lowest debt to GDP ratio, deficit to GDP ratio as well, and we are on a solid fiscal footing. Now, as you say, there are macroeconomic changes that are underway right now. It's happening everywhere in the world. And because of that, we have to be able to spend less in day-to-day operations. It is a generational opportunity. As I have said to you, Canada is looked to throughout the world. Canada builds ships. Canada builds cars, vehicles. Canada has an abundance of energy. Canada is the only G7 nation that has a free trade agreement with the United States. So when I hear these comments, when you hear from colleagues what Canada can do, and I know what the fiscal situation is in Canada, I trust and I have confidence in Canadians. I listened to the colleagues from the comments rather from our colleagues earlier. About the new way of presenting the budget. That is something that is going to allow us to deal with expenditures. People at home know that when you pay for your cell phone bill, when you buy a car, I think that what we want to do is to be able to give Canadians more transparency. The new budgetary cycle, having a budget in the fall, Madam Chair, will allow the committee to work. We are actually responding to the requests from committees asking for a change in the budgetary cycle because in the fall it aligns better. So that gives more clarity because the partners will be able to see the budget before voting on the main estimates. It gives more clarity as well for the provinces and the territories. My colleagues in the provinces and territories are very happy with the change. You have a federal budget presented that was brought down before the provincial governments. You were a former minister of finance, and you know that it's not an ideal situation when it's like that. People want the ability to predict, to see what is coming, and that allows also allows for more time for the construction season, like in the Saguenay area and elsewhere in Canada. We know that entrepreneurs who build in Canada will also be winning. It's all of this is a new way of presenting the budget, but it in no way changes the calculation of the deficit. It'll be done the same way that it was done in the past, but what we are adding is an additional way of presenting the figures. And the public accounts will still be operating on the basis of the accounting system that works in Canada. So we're just adding more clarity. And I would say, Madam Chair, that as a chairperson of a committee, it allows your committee, any committee, to play its role better, to supervise public expenditure. There will be consultations all during the summer, and I think this will facilitate things for Canadians. 20 seconds left. Well, in any case, since you mention it, In fact, yes, as a former minister of Finance in Quebec, the changes that you are making to the budgetary cycle will definitely help out at the provincial level. Thank you. Sir, you have 6 minutes. Mr. Garon. Hello, Minister. You were named Minister at the beginning of 2025. You didn't bring down a budget, and the Prime Minister dropped a writ, held elections, and all of this in the context of the tariffs that have been imposed. And you come back in May, and you said no budget this fall. And you were contradicted by the Prime Minister in public to that effect. You said no to that budget and that timing. So if you're not telling us whether or not there's going to be a budget next spring, but the committee was blocked in its work. There are more than 200 groups from Quebec during all this time that wanted to speak in public before the committee, not behind closed doors like you Liberals do. With you, we're talking about pre-budget consultations. Well, is this the new approach of the government to say the Prime Minister consults behind closed doors, consults friends? Groups come to see us in our ridings, and they say, we want consultation. Is this the new norm for Canadians? As Vice Chair of the committee, I see that you got a great deal of happiness in your voice today. There have been consultations a month ago. You all asked for a new way of operating, and we respect what Parliament has asked us to do. You asked us to consult the provinces. I've done all that. And not only do I issue press communiques, press releases, I met with the press just before coming here. So that should certainly help you to be able to say to Canadians what is being done. You asked me to do things, Mr. Garon, and I did them to the benefit of all parliamentarians. Imagine you'll have all next summer to consult. 1 year. 1 year it took. Madam Chair, he took 5.5 minutes. The minister knows what he's doing with the clock. The minister is telling us that he's going to bring in a budget, but he's consulted no one publicly. And he tells us that the world has changed, that the situation has changed, and he has just told us, you be happy, because we haven't consulted anyone. But we're getting phone calls from groups who want public consultation. The new approach is that everything behind closed doors. Mr. Minister, are you in control of your department? And I'm going to tell you why I ask you this question. In the summer, there was a request made to cut across the board by 15%. In the spring budget, there was a supply bill that was increased by 26%, an increase of 300% in certain areas. So, Mr. Minister, there was an increase of 16% in other areas. So what happens when you change your ideas like that? Have you lost control of your department? I hear much happiness in your tone, Mr. Garon, this morning. I worked all summer, and Mr. Turnbull should be offended by what you are saying. 57 bilaterals, 26 cities, 13 provinces and territories, 8,700 questions, 8,700 rather, questionnaires that were filled out by Canadians. You know, if you don't call that work, Mr. Minister, I know that you do appreciate my questions. How can you say in the same speech that you consult the committee, that consultation with the opposition parties is important, and yet you come out with a budget, and the last 200 groups that were supposed to appear in committee, have had to wait a year. How are you even capable of saying such things? Is that the Liberal thinking? You should be happy to see the extent that I respect Parliament. Mr. Garon, I know that you want to make clips for social media, but the reality is this. 3,000 and some... My questions are tough ones, I know, but I believe they are respectful. When I have groups, and it happened last week, groups come to see us, and they say, not only have we heard nothing from the minister, he doesn't even acknowledge what we've sent him. The minister tells us we should be jovial. When 5 minutes before the committee comes on, he announces what he should have done earlier this year. And then he accuses me of wanting to just make TikTok clips. What is happening with this government? How disconnected can they be from the public, from the Canadians? Can we wait another year to have appearances before committee? It's awful. Well, Mr. Garon, if you want, we had 83,000 submissions and questionnaires filled out. The committee was not consulted. The committee was not consulted, Madam Chair. Your time is up, Mr. Garon.
Conservatives, Mr. Halan, you are going to be taking this round.
Thank you. Minister, since your government doubled the national debt, Canadians are stuck with a bill that sees more tax dollars going to bankers and bondholders in interest payments on the debt your government accumulated than what goes to healthcare transfers to the provinces. Can you confirm in Budget 2025, bankers and bondholders will get less than what goes to provinces for healthcare transfers?
You know what? I won't stand here and to be lectured by a member of the Conservative, Madam Chair, who voted against every measure we presented to support Canadians. This member and his colleagues have voted against pharmacare.
Minister,
they voted
it's a
against
simple
dental
question.
care.
Can you just
They're
confirm that
voted
for
against
Canadians
helping children
that
with
healthcare transfers
with
will
the
be
children food
larger
program across the nation,
than what
Madam
goes
Chair?
to bankers and bondholders? It's a simple yes or no question, Minister. As usual, you're not answering.
For Canadians who are watching you, I think they should go to look at your voting record and really answer the question, why did you vote against
So I will take
families
that
and workers when we
as
provided
bankers and
support?
I would
When you
just
want to
ask
talk about
members and the
affordability.
minister not to talk over each other for the interpreters,
I'll take
please.
that as bankers and bondholders will once again get more money in interest payments on this government's debt on Canadian taxpayers than what goes to healthcare transfers. Minister, in September of 2023, you made a big spectacle. You were going to haul in all the grocery store CEOs, and you claimed that by Thanksgiving 2023, grocery prices would come down. 2 years later, it's almost Thanksgiving 2025. Grocery inflation has skyrocketed due to Liberal grocery tax and other taxes and the amount of money that you guys spent. On top of all that, we see overall grocery price inflation has increased to almost 7%. Essentials at the grocery store, like ground beef, is up 30% since then. Apples almost up 40%. Tomatoes up 15%. Chicken up 20%. And food prices are rising 50% faster in Canada than the U.S. When will food prices and grocery prices come down?
Well, I would say, Madam Chair, for Canadians who are watching, I invite you to vote in favor of C4. C4 provides a middle-class tax cut to 22 million Canadians.
Will C4 lower grocery prices, yes or no?
I could not understand the question, Madam Chair, because I was talking whilst the member was asking me to respond. But I would say I would invite all the members, and I'm sure because he's a very influential member of the Conservative caucus, to convince his colleagues to vote for C4, because C4 actually will reduce taxes for 22 million Canadians. That is the kind of measure that puts more money in the pockets of Canadians, and that's the kind of affordability measure that Canadians will be wanting.
Minute pour moi. Écoutez, vous avez dit qu'il y a eu plusieurs tables
Listen, you
rondes.
said that there were a number of round tables that were done during the summer. It's October 6th now, and November 4th. On November 4th, we're going to have the budget. So what are we doing here in the Finance Committee? What are we being useful? No opposition member has been able to participate in those meetings that were held. There have been no meetings for us. You tell us that we have an important role in the Finance Committee. You're a politician that I respect very much. But what respect do you have here in our committee? Well, you should be happy that with what we've done, because you, the committee, asked us to change the cycle. We had a committee report that requested the budgetary cycle be changed. And in your current, Minister, it is October 6th. The Minister, you have all next summer to consult. We did it, but it's up to you now to decide to consult people. But what you are saying is that we have to do this individually. The Finance Committee did not work as a committee to consult. No, you should celebrate what is being done today. I know a lot of people in your area from your home riding, and in Quebec, they're being very happy because we're aligning ourselves better with the construction season. But with the supply bill, you'll have a better view of what's going to be happening. You should be really happy. Minister, I have a few questions for you in limited time. The PBO his role is to give a non-partisan, neutral, and independent analysis of what is being done. Are you satisfied with Mr. Jacques meeting these standards with what he has done? Yeah. Oh, you're saved by the bell, Minister. Yes, your time is up.
Donald for 5 minutes.
Regarde les deux autres qui disent.
Minister Champagne and Deputy, thank you for being here today. I think the Canadians know which parties have been stalling and grandstanding. We've been here for almost a month, and we could have heard from stakeholders, but because of the games that have been played, we haven't had that ability. So I'll ask the Minister today, what are the cornerstones of this upcoming budget as your new way of framing expenses, the capital investments and versus the operating costs? How will this help both the government and private organizations, particularly those in the construction trade, invest in Canada and help build the strongest economy in the G7?
I say thank you to Mr. McDonald and to Prince Edward Island. We're all happy that the chair of what we call the federal, provincial, and territorial group of finance ministers chaired by the Prince Edward Island, and I did inform the chair this morning of our new way of doing. I think it's very simple. The world is changing at a pace that we have rarely seen before. The speed, the scale, and the scope of the change require that we adapt. And today it gives us an opportunity to focus on our core objective, which is to spend less so we can invest more. And that's why we're presenting a new capital budgeting framework and a new budget cycle. The first one responds to clarity because members of Parliament have been asking us through committee, and I know the Vice Chair will go in the record, but we have been asked by this Parliament to change the budget cycle in order to leave more time for parliamentarians to see the budget when they vote for the main estimates, because the main estimates have to be presented by 31st of March. And therefore, you have had instances in the past where budget came after main estimates, which is not ideal. So we've been asked, and we're responding to that. The second thing is predictability. If you're a province, a territory, or a business, or even more, Madam Chair, I think about all these organizations in the country that depend for their functioning and their operation on federal funding. They'd like to know whether they'd get funds in the budget ahead of their own fiscal year, because now it's difficult for them, whether, depending on the time of their fiscal year, they don't know what's going to be the federal contribution. And lastly, Mr. McDonald, you understand that because you've been an entrepreneur, you've been very successful, and we're lucky to have you in Parliament now. But construction season, if there's one thing that doesn't wait for parliamentarians, is the construction season. And that won't be a surprise to our friends from Alberta, because in Alberta, in different parts of the country, I've heard from people that say, and I was infrastructure minister before, they say, can you align your decisions with the construction season? If you're presenting a budget in the spring, and, for example, you need to build in the north, you need to book the barge a year in advance. You can book that. You can book your workers. You cannot have requests for proposal from entrepreneurs by the time it's too late. So we can't afford as a nation to miss one other construction season. We can't afford that. We need to make generational investment in our future, and that's why this framework will help us to focus on what matters, prioritize our investment, and be more transparent to Canadians. That's why you have seen provinces, and even the vice chair of the committee with the group, provinces and groups, you will see they're saying to us, thank you for changing that, because that's what we've been asking, and we're responding to the wish of Parliament. And for me, it's about setting the clock straight. And after that, the committee with the chair will have to decide when you do your budget consultation. We'll certainly do that all across the summer, and we do that all the year. And I want to thank Mr. Turnbull for all the work he's done this summer. We've heard from one thing which is slightly offensive is to say you've not consulted. I mean, this is probably in 10 years the largest public consultation for a budget that we have seen. And therefore, I think that this is going to be welcomed by Canadians. They want more transparency and more clarity. And by presenting what's the difference or where their money goes with respect to capital investment and day-to-day spending, I think it's adding. That's why I don't understand my conservative colleagues in their criticism, because this is adding, it's not replacing. It's just providing a new lens. And I can tell you the deficit and the debt will be recorded in the same manner as in previous budgets, but it's going to provide an additional lens. So you provide more information to people, and as parliamentarians, we should all welcome that.
Minister, can you speak to how your department's working to scale up prefab and industrialized construction methods in smaller jurisdictions like Atlantic Canada?
Well, thank you for that, and I think all members would be happy to hear that. We need to do things differently. We need to build more homes. We know that the three things that Canadians have told us during the summer, and I'm sure it's the same thing for Mr. Garon, who's been listening to many people.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Just before I turn back to Mr. Garon, I'd ask Mr. Kelly to please keep his comments to himself. Everyone else is able to listen. Thank you. Mr. Garon.
Monsieur le ministre.
Minister, during the election campaign, your government bought votes. A few days before the election by reimbursing the carbon tax that people hadn't paid in advance. I know it's not the case, but the PBO, Mr. Giroux, confirmed it. Your official, Mr. Coulombe, said it was being refunded before being paid. Are you going to continue to say that you did not pay out reimbursements for this carbon? No, I haven't misplaced my notes. I like the work you do, Mr. Garon. I like your questions. Is that your answer? You've heard the answer from the officials. It was a technical one. But I can tell you that Quebec has its a carbon tax system, which is different. And that it comes from the Consolidated Revenue Fund, yes. Minister, in those provinces, the federal government sent out checks before the tax was even paid. Some millions, some $814 million. We've been told by Quebec officials. So how are you going to repay the $814 million to Quebec? Well, yes, it comes out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund, but the repairs for the Champlain Bridge in Montreal also comes out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. Minister, all of these costs come out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund.
Really conscious of the Conservatives. I was in the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. I'm sorry, I meant to say interpreters. We heard about acoustic shock and the fact that our interpreters can't regulate the sound and they use their ears and voices. And I'm surprised that a Bloc member would talk over someone knowing how sensitive the interpreters' ears are. And we'd like to avoid injuries among that valuable resource.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. So,
point of order. I understand, Madam Chair. I understand what my colleague is saying. Yes, he's right. We have to be careful. But now we are in a committee to ask questions. The minister is almost presenting his budget beforehand. Please, Mr. Garon, Mr. Minister, all members of the committee, please bear the interpreters in mind when you speak. My question is a simple one. Simple, Minister. I know you appreciate that. The $814 million that are owed Quebec, is it in your budget? When you read your budget, will it be there? Madam Chair, apologies to the interpreters. We'll try to do better. They help us do our work here. Mr. Garon. Yes, that refund came from the Consolidated Revenue Fund. When are you going to repay Quebecers? That refund wasn't done for Quebec. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Kelly from the Conservatives for 5 minutes.
Minister, on what year will budget be balanced?
Our budget will be a generational investment in the future of this country, and you're going to be happy, Mr. Kelly, because there'll be a lot for you to talk about to your people in Alberta.
But if you don't mind, Minister, would you answer my question? And what year will it be balanced?
And like I said, I've already responded to this question, but what you're going to see is generational investments to put this country on a path for
no, Minister,
the
you may
strongest
have
economy in the G7.
Minister, you may have responded to the question, but you haven't answered it. So I'm asking you, since this is a parliamentary committee, if you would answer the question: in what year will the budget balance?
I've already answered that question. You can ask me as many
Humor me then,
times as you want, sir, but the answer is going to be very similar to what I've told you before. I've already answered that question, and we've been very clear that we're going to be balancing the operating budget by 28-29.
Okay. Minister, it's correct. You have been asked this question many times, including by me. You have responded many times. You have never answered it. You have just now said something about an operating budget. So I understand that you are distracting Canadians with accounting rule changes, but I'd like you to answer. I'll give you one more chance to answer my question. When will the budget be balanced?
I've heard you very well, and I think it's irresponsible for a member of parliament to suggest the question you've been asking. The deficit and the debt will be calculated and presented as it has always been in accordance with the accounting principle. So I would say Canadians are watching that, and they're watching you carefully. What we're saying, they understand it. I just did a press conference, and I trust you. Canadians understand that. They really understand that. They said the government will present a new lens so they have more transparency, more clarity. And you should talk to your colleagues at the provincial level. They really welcome what we're doing, sir. And that's what you've been asking me. So for the record, the Committee of Parliament has been asking
Minister,
the Minister of Finance to change the budget cycle. We're responding to the wish of Parliament.
Minister, you are refusing to answer the question, as you have refused to answer this question repeatedly. So I am left to conclude that the budget will never be balanced under this government. In fact, at the Operations Committee, when asked, at the Operations Committee, the PBO said the path we're on currently isn't sustainable. And when he was asked what year the budget will be balanced, the PBO said, is that a trick question?
Well,
I mean, but it's not a trick question. It's a question that Canadians need answered by the Minister of Finance. Will you answer at this committee and tell Canadians what year you will balance the budget?
Let me just quote the previous parliamentary budget officer. It's not shocking to see deficit go up because the economy is slowing and we have NATO commitment. To me, it's sustainable. That's Kevin Page, sir, who has been a parliamentary budget officer for quite some time.
Yes, he did. He did great work.
Actually, what he said is the reflection. I so wish you would be at the G7 meetings with me, because you would see what colleagues are doing. We have the most stable fiscal position of the G7.
Okay, Minister,
we have
no,
the
you're not
lowest
answering the
debt to
question,
GDP,
so we'll try a different question, Minister.
You should at least tell Canadians as it is, sir. Those are facts.
Minister,
you can have your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts.
Indeed,
Minister,
Minister,
the facts
it's a fact.
are what they are, sir. We have a AAA credit rating like Germany.
The current budget deficit is projected to be your current budget deficit does not even include NATO commitments. If we are to include the C.D. Howe Institute, for example, stated that if we start to include your commitments that you've made publicly, that the deficit may be as high as $90 billion. Is that correct? Will it be over $90 billion if you keep some of your spending promises?
Are you suggesting that we should not meet our NATO commitments or defend the sovereignty of Canada?
No, I'm suggesting that you should answer a question.
Well, the answer is very clear. We're going to meet our NATO commitments. We're going to invest in the sovereignty of Canada. And Canadians have understand the world is changing, and we need to make these generational investments.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. On va revenir à moi pour une minute.
Mr. Minister will come back to me for a minute. Here, the PBO said that if there is a trend from the government to increase the debt to GDP ratio, the PBO responded that it would be very disquieting. Can you not tell Canadians what's happening? Because we are very disquieted as well on this side. We are concerned. I can say that we have the most enviable position of the G7.
But argued Canada is fiscally in a pretty good place relative to other G7 countries. I'm just reading from an article. So what you're saying is that, excusez-moi, je dirais pas parce que je citais.
Excuse me, because I read it in English, so I apologize. No, I understood. Thank you, sir.
We're now going to go to Mr. Turnbull for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for being here, and to the Deputy Minister as well. Minister, I'm struggling here because opposition members are saying that somehow we haven't done comprehensive consultation. I can assure them, just ask my wife for a testimony about how little I was home for this summer as we traveled across the country and met with so many stakeholders. This was a highly comprehensive approach, in my view, to consultation. What I think the members are suggesting, though, is that they have not taken the opportunity to use this committee's time to do pre-budget consultations, which was their choice, not our choice, because we actually suggested that our committee could be undertaking that work currently. And as Mr. MacDonald had suggested, that we have spent the last month on other topics. C4 is certainly important, but before I get there, I want to ask you a little bit about the new capital budgeting framework and the new budget cycle. So, first of all, we consulted with the PBO. Is that correct?
Yes, we consulted with the Auditor General. We have large, and if I may, Madam Chair, I just want to thank you and your family, Mr. Turnbull, because I know this summer has been very busy, and I know I understand your feeling, because for me as well, when 83,722 people took the time to submit an online survey, it's kind of surprising to hear some of the comments. What would you say to these 80,000 people who took the time to do that? Their voice mattered. Absolutely. And they voiced that, and they provided us with the information. And I know 50 roundtables, 57 bilats, 20 cities, 13 provinces, 1 federal, provincial, territorial meeting. I mean, this has been the consultation like I've not seen in a long time, and I want to thank you because you've been instrumental. And to your point, I think the committee member would have the opportunity to do that next summer. It's going to be great. They'll be busy all summer if they so wish to go around the country and to listen to witnesses, so to inform the budget. But to suggest there's not been budget consultation, as you would know, you did it yourself, and your family paid quite a heavy price, you having to travel across the country to do that. I understand how you feel.
Yeah, thanks, Minister, and I believe it was a very comprehensive process. We also have released detailed and clear definitions of capital investments, have we not, today?
Yes, we did a press release today. We've been very clear what is going to be capital formation. And I would say, Mr. Turnbull, Canadians understand that. I mean, it's, when, like I said, when you pay your bills, you spend. When you invest in a house, when you buy a house, you invest. And I think, for me, that's why I don't understand some of the comments that were made earlier, because as Mr. Laitao said, the former finance minister of Quebec said, having more transparency, more clarity for parliamentarians, we're actually answering what the parliament asks us to do. They say change the budget cycle. Then what we heard from business, they said, provide us the predictability we need. We'd like to know in advance what you're going to put in the budget so we can plan accordingly. And then one thing that parliamentarians wish is, to match the construction season at the time we need to do that. So for me, to tell Canadians in a very clear way, this is where your money is going. Yeah. This is for capital formation. This is for operating expenses. I think my conservative colleagues in the bloc should be celebrating that we're providing that kind of transparency. And this is not, so we're clear with Canadians, it's not replacing, it is adding. So it is adding a lens that people can be able to see when they open the budget and say, okay, I understand where my money is going. And then everything else will be in accordance with all the accounting standards that we have always used for budgeting in Canada.
Thank you, Minister. So when I knock doors in my riding and talk to my constituents, they all say the same thing. They want a growing, strong economy in Canada. They want jobs for their kids. They want affordable housing. So to me, what we're entering here is a budget cycle and a capital budgeting framework. We're making these changes to focus on something we call capital formation. How is that going to help our economy grow?
Well, this is fundamental to the future of our nation. You know, the world is changing. We need to adapt. Like I said, the speed and scale and scope of the change is something once in a generation. And I think as parliamentarian, it's not just the government. I look at my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We need to meet that moment. People before us have met the moment. I can think in 1945, people met the moment. Canadians instinctively understand when faced with something like that, you need to invest. You need to reduce your expenses. That's why we say we're going to spend less so we can invest
Sorry,
more.
Minister. Thank you. That is time for this round. Colleagues, looking at the clock, we don't have time for another full round, but if colleagues are interested, we could do a condensed round with 2.5 minutes each to the Conservatives and the Liberals and 1.5 minutes to the Bloc. Do I see agreement for that? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Ms. Kobina?
Minister, I'd like to have a frank discussion with you. Just simple questions, simple answers. You say you want to change how you budget. And I have to ask myself, why not change your reckless spending instead? Because if I can say to my husband, buying too many purses is an investment, but that doesn't change the fact that it is irresponsible. So my question to you is, why are you changing how you present the budget rather than changing your reckless spending so that on a net basis, you actually balance it?
Well, you should ask yourself why you voted against measures that support Canadians. I think people watching at home would be surprised to see your voting records and say you voted against measures that would make their life more
very
easy.
simple answer. I really want you to answer my question. Why are you changing how you're presenting it rather than actually trying to balance the budget?
I think Canadians are entitled to transparency. In a frank discussion between you and I think your husband and your family and everyone in your riding is entitled to have more transparency to see the budgeting, where their tax dollars going to be used. I think this is about clarity, transparency.
I agree. Transparency is a good thing. But every single person in my riding does not get to rework their budget to see if it looks better at month end. The bottom line is the bottom line. Yep. If you don't have money, you don't have money. Why are you changing how you're presenting the budget instead of actually balancing it?
So the bottom line is the bottom line, but I think you cannot be against giving more information to Canadians. People want to know where their money is going. Is it for expenses or investment?
The result is the same.
Is the deficit going to be higher than under your government and Mr. Carney's government compared to Trudeau's?
You should be informing your constituent that we have the lowest deficit to GDP ratio in the G7.
Minister, please.
No, but
I'm
that
asking
really
a very
matters.
simple question. Is it going to be higher
That really
than
matters.
Trudeau's or not?
I would say you need to compare our fiscal position with the other G7 country because Canadians look at that. Our colleagues,
Minister,
the bond rating agency.
Numbers don't change. It's black and white. I come from the financial sector. Is it going to be higher than Trudeau's or lower than Trudeau's?
I know you come from the financial sector, and that's why I'm happy you're on the finance committee, but you would know because you're a very smart
Thank you, Ms. Kobina.
financial
I'm going
planner.
to turn it over to Mr. Letao for 2.5 minutes. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I'm back. Just a clarification before asking a question. The investment that is being made in the economy, that investment part, will have an effect, will work on the potential growth for Canadians. That it's not inflationary. We are stimulating the supply, the capacity productivity, if you like. Here's my question. Affordability, C4 deals with this matter. And in the present context, where the price of certain products has really skyrocketed, what is the impact of C4? Thank you for enlightening the members of the committee. You know how to read things, but as a former Minister of Finance, you understand what is meant here with respect to the changes in the optics, a new lens. We are fortunate to have the strongest position in this G7. But coming back to C4, the way of measuring was to drop the income tax bracket to lower taxes, income tax for Canadians, for some millions of Canadians, and then they'll be happy about it because they voted for it. It would be a little tough to say to your constituents when you vote against, I voted against a drop in income tax. Well, first of all, it's housing and also the tax burden of Canadians that are of concern, and prices, of course. So what we are going to do is try to lighten that tax burden for Canadians. We want to move the bill along into third reading so that it will be dealt with and become law. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Littell. Mr. Garon, 1.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, there were a lot of agreements for health transfers that are reaching their end, reaching their limit. And we haven't had a budget for 18 months. So I think it's appropriate to ask you this question. As of next year, those health transfers are going to have to grow because of rising health costs. Are these transfers going to be unconditional to the provinces? I'd just like to say that the statement that we made in the press release today that there will be an economic update in the spring. I think, Mr. Garon, you're an economist who's very well known, a minister that's of finance who's 30 days away from bringing down his budget, can't really speak to what's in it. I know in time you will have the answers to your questions. You will know what is in the budget, measures that will help Quebecers and the provinces and the territories, good for the regions, good for the industry, and good for all of this country.
Bon, mais merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone, for this meeting, this part of the meeting. Thank you, Minister. I know, Deputy Minister, it was a difficult meeting for you today. We'll suspend the meeting to now prepare for the second half.
get started on the second hour of our meeting today. Pursuant to the order of reference of Thursday, June 12th, 2025, and the motion adopted on September 22nd, 2025, the committee shall resume consideration of Bill C4, an act respecting certain affordability measures for Canadians and another measure. I would like to welcome our witnesses, Jennifer Keesmaat, the President and CEO of Collective Marquee, Jeff Cape, who is the CEO of Assembly Corp, and Richard Lyle, the President of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. All virtual witnesses have conducted a mandatory witness onboarding test, and I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor to questions. So we will begin with Ms. Keesmaat.
Hello, your honorable committee members. It's a thrill to be here with you today and to speak to you regarding housing and in particular delivering affordable housing. My name is Jennifer Keesmaat. I am the CEO of Collective Marquee, a Canadian development company focused on delivering purpose-built rental and affordable housing across Toronto with a project in Hamilton as well. I'm also the former chief planner of the City of Toronto, and I'm also the founder of the Canada Build Modular Summit, an inaugural event that will take place on October 23rd. And we look forward to welcoming Minister Robinson for a fireside chat, where we will be looking at creating a deeper and broader ecosystem to modernize construction in Canada. At Collective Marquee, we are home builders. And let me tell you, it is tough out there. Our company is currently leading the development and construction of projects that directly advance federal and municipal housing priorities, including Tyndale Green, a 1,400-home, mixed-income, mass timber modular community with a daycare and community facilities, and 275 Merton Street, 447 purpose-built rental homes in the City of Toronto, with 30% affordable units that will be affordable for 99 years. Both of those projects began construction this month. On Bloor Street in downtown Toronto, we are rebuilding the Bloor Street United Church in the podium of a building that has about 300 residential homes above. It's a project that straddles the subway, incredibly complex. And this week, we will be pouring the 14th floor concrete slab, and window installation begins in the next few weeks. Residents are expected to move into their new homes in 2027. We've also spent this year closing units and moving residents into 450 new transit-oriented homes in a new mid-rise building in the north of the city, and that includes affordable home ownership in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. As you can see, we have housing at every stage of development, and these are exactly the kinds of projects this committee and our government says it wants to see more of. Projects that integrate affordability, sustainability, modularity, and community amenities. Today, though, these projects are the exception. They're not the norm. Many others, including viable sites in our pipeline and across the sector, are being deferred and canceled as we speak outright as a result of high government fees combined with uncertain market conditions and stubbornly high costs to build. I support the first-time home buyer GST rebate in Bill C4 as a step forward, but I see it only as that. I also believe it should be available to all buyers of primary residences, not just first-time home buyers. In some ways, it's the beginning of what we should be doing. We know that in CMHC's last forecast, they show that housing starts will decline by approximately 30,000 homes between 2024 and 2027. If that projection holds, the impact will be severe on both affordability and jobs. We know based on StatsCan data that we are seeing tens of thousands of jobs being lost in construction across the country for framers, plumbers, electricians who build our homes. But this doesn't even consider the broader supply chain that produces windows, concrete, drywalls, all of the other businesses that feed into the development process. The $1 million contracts and $10 million contracts that our company tenders every single day as part of our projects. These are important companies building an important product that are right now on the cusp of significant decline in our country. For this reason, I urge you to take an ecosystem approach to understanding housing delivery in Canada. We have locked in too many in their existing homes, and they are being penalized by the GST, the land transfer tax, the high cost of DCs on new builds when people consider downsizing. This means that we lock up the system, and it prevents families being able to access the homes they need. And it prevents young people from thinking about a future and the dream of raising their family in this country. We have an industry that is robust and capable. And strangely, government fees such as taxes and DCs are the very last thing that should be hindering housing development. So we find ourselves in a rather bizarre situation. The government has signaled that it will act on development charges, but in the absence of doing so immediately, the industry will continue to slow. If you sat and listened to the King during the speech from the throne, you heard him talk about DCs and DCs being cut in half across the country.
Ms. Keys-Matt, could I ask you just to wrap up, please? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I will say this. The risk to us right now is inaction. We need to move quickly. We needed to move quickly 6 months ago. We needed to move quickly 2 years ago. The sooner we take to get the longer we wait to get these policies in place, the more we will have to make up in the long run as our industry continues to slow at a time when we need it to scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Keys-Matt. Mr. Cape, 5 minutes, please. Sorry, Ms. Keys-Matt, if you could just put yourself on mute in the interim. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So Jeff Cape, the CEO of Assembly, also here to represent a coalition we've put together over the course of the last 6 months, focused on industrialized construction. So the Canadian Industrialized Construction Coalition, over 100 companies aligned in their views on the policy requirements to try to advance affordability in Canada. So first off, thank you, all of you, for focusing on such a critically important subject, the affordability agenda. I understand C4 has a particular focus on the GST relief and how that has an opportunity to affect both purchasers, but also accelerate the construction of new builds. And certainly, I believe it's the right idea. At the broadest level, it has an opportunity to help accelerate purchasing and to create the necessary momentum in the industry. So it's warmly welcomed. I suppose there's always a debate about whether or not it's enough or not too much or not enough in regards to the scope of that particular policy recommendation. And that's not for one for me to opine on. I know it's an initiative, it's a policy initiative that's required in relationship to a larger collection of policy agendas. And so with that in mind, the announcement made on September 14th, I think it was Sunday, the 14th, by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure to invest $13 billion in the Build Canada Homes Initiative is the right companion to the GST relief strategy, the larger, more robust program that wraps around GST rebate that feeds and supports individual consumers of housing. But that larger strategy is what I believe is really the necessary focus for us as we drive towards affordability in Canada. There's a critical requirement for us to shift the way we build and the way we build our supply chain relationships in regards to construction of housing in Canada. With that in mind, though, the coalition we put together developed 19 primary recommendations and 17 secondary recommendations, all of them policies oriented towards financing, towards supply chain integration development, and towards the critical requirement for streamlining approvals and approval processes across the country. So I guess I'll leave it at that, other than maybe to identify that the work that Assembly is doing right now is drawing on global best practice. As a company, we've spent the last 7 years trying to figure out where in the world the most informed and most advanced thinking is in regards to both policy and fabrication for affordable housing. And we landed on Sweden, and we've designed a relationship, a deeper working relationship with Lindbach, one of the largest firms in the world focused on modular housing. And the learning curve for us, I think, is something we can share across the country. It's certainly an idea that should be shared through policy networks, provincially, municipally, and federally, of course. But the opportunity to leapfrog in Canada is available to us, and that's my hope.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Cape. It's not often we get time back from opening statements, so thank you for that. Mr. Lyle, over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear today. Following Finance Minister Champagne is, I hope, a recognition of just how important addressing the housing crisis is for our country's future prosperity. As Prime Minister Carney has noted, we are dealing with a fracture on many levels. Housing is one of them. We know the top two issues for Canadians are affordability and housing. How did we get where we are now? The answer is essentially that we systemically dropped the ball. We took housing for granted and no one was really paying collective attention or even aligning policies. The ratio of housing cost to incomes became grossly imbalanced, and we have ended up with a national crisis with the epicenter in Ontario and Vancouver. It should be kept in mind the crisis varies in different regions of the country, and that makes one-size-fits-all federal solutions difficult. Alberta will build nearly 60,000 homes this year, roughly the same as Ontario, which has 3 times the population. Indeed, the Ontario situation is by far the worst in North America. Given that it's Canada's engine of growth and we are facing unprecedented challenges from south of the border, this is bad news for the country as a whole. Governments have taken some useful measures, yet the various targets set by them have not been met. In fact, we are going in the opposite direction. The solutions are complex to the uninitiated. The challenges are technocratic. Shelter, food, and safety are unique economic, fundamental, basic needs for any society. People need housing. However, we are taxing it like cigarettes and alcohol, so-called sin taxes designed to discourage use, which is just wrong-headed. ResCon was the first to release a report demonstrating the scale of these costs. Dumping those costs on young and first-time homebuyers in many jurisdictions is fundamentally unjust. The affordability of housing is central to the well-being and prosperity. You can't grow a modern economy without housing. You can't attract investment without it. We will only drive away our best and brightest without it. Builders have cut prices in a desperate attempt to make new projects work. Sales of new condos in our region of the country are down 90%, and low-rise housing has fallen 70%, and there is no end in sight. The coming loss of employment will devastate the broader economy. We have long advocated for consumer relief in the form of cutting sales taxes, development charges, which are a brutally regressive consumer tax, land transfer taxes, and other charges. We also need approvals process to be streamlined and modernized, like almost everywhere else. The private sector accounts for 90% of housing produced, and the market is currently dysfunctional. There is a need for social housing as well, which we build, but the government must drive those solutions. Bill C-4 addresses some issues which is important, of greater importance, so the federal government is doing what it said it would do. Do we think more is needed? Yes, but this is a critical, important first step in our view. 2 issues of critical importance. The first is the first-time homebuyer sales tax for consumers. We commend the government for taking this step, and while we thought it should have gone further, we welcomed it insofar as providing some relief for first-time buyers. It is unfortunate that this has not been picked up by the province of Ontario. Tarion, Ontario's new home warranty program, noted that in 2024, 39% of new housing purchasers, and this is for new housing, were first-time buyers. This and other mixed messages about just how many first-time buyers have had a chilling effect on the market, manifested by those waiting for sales tax relief to be extended by Ontario. Sales of new housing in the GTA have reached a historic low where there will be fewer than 5,000 units sold this year. The first-time buyer break will help one segment of the market. I have no doubt further measures will be needed to assist others. Home building projects cannot pencil on the scale required without consumer tax relief. Another challenge lies with development charges, which have become a runaway tax grab camouflaged as a charge to developers. This is where the federal government's announcement with respect to addressing them in Ontario is critically important. The Housing Accelerator Fund must be more disciplined in rewarding municipalities that meet targets. We released a report last week with Mike Moffat of the Missing Middle Initiative, scoring 22 of 34 Ontario municipalities with an F. Also, it is worth noting that ultimately municipalities are creatures of the province, so if they are continuing with not in my backyard policies, the province can and must step in, as has been done in Alberta. With respect to Canada Build Homes, we appreciate the government's intention of aligning all things housing under one roof. The trick here, of course, will be how it will work and whether or not the government can be nimble and effective. Choosing Anna Bailão to lead BCH is an inspired choice. New housing supply must be a priority. Bill C4, inclusion of housing affordability measures, is a serious step in the right direction and must be supported. Measures must be expanded and policies and programs must be adjusted as required. Housing supply should not be a partisan issue. The various levels of government need to be aligned on this as it affects other policy-related matters. We need to get the dream of a better life back on track and help our young who have frankly been let down in the extreme. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Lyle, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your opening remarks. I just want to let witnesses know that Mr. Cape is temporarily offline and we are working to get him back. But in the meantime, the first round of questioning goes to Ms. Kobina. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for Mr. Lyle. Would a Canadian who lost their home as a result of the affordability crisis and is now trying to re-enter the market benefit from the GST rebate?
Yes.
If it's not a first-time home buyer, though?
Oh, no.
No, they wouldn't.
Sorry. First-time homebuyer, yeah, I'm focused on the first. Sorry about that.
So the answer is no. Would a single mother who sold her home because of a divorce, for instance, benefit from the GST rebate?
If she's not a first-time homebuyer, no.
Okay.
So,
Would seniors who are looking to downsize to a smaller unit and therefore, of course, freeing up a family home benefit from the GST rebate?
no.
Would a young couple who is looking to sell their condo and move to a townhouse to start a family benefit from the GST rebate?
No.
So this GST rebate policy discriminates against people solely based on the fact that they have had a home, but does not take into consideration their life circumstances. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Development charges can be responsible for about 30% of the cost of a new home. Would you agree with that?
Well, the study, we did 2 studies on this. The first one was 31%, then we updated it to 36%. That's all taxes, fees, and levies, which includes DCs. DCs are, depending on where you are, because they've been set differently in different municipalities in Ontario at any rate, around 20%. The other fact I would bring, the Terrion report, which is the new home owner report on new housing produced, set the first-time home buyers, and this is why we, think this is worth supporting, of course, at 39% of buyers in 2024. That's new housing. And what we're interested in, of course, is we need net new supply, not resale. So.
And on the topic of development charges, do you agree that development charges have increased up to 600% roughly in the last decade?
Yeah, we've done work on that, and we've worked with Mike Moffat on that. Depending on which, scale you pick, it can be up to 2,000%. But they've certainly outstripped incomes. I mean, there has been virtually no real income growth. Meanwhile, these costs have just gone right through the roof. So effectively, a down payment today, especially for first-time home buyers, is basically an increase in 2 taxes in just over 10 years, development charges and sales taxes.
Yeah, so it's no surprise that we have a housing crisis and Canadians cannot afford a home. Does this bill that we're looking at, C4, impact development charges?
No.
Does the Act accelerate the timeline for municipalities to approve projects?
No.
Is it true that housing starts in Toronto fell to its lowest level since 1996?
Yes. And in fact, where sales are going, we're really at the beginning of this crash. So this is why any and all steps need to be taken, but also why, we will welcome positive measures. And certainly where governments say they're going to do something and actually do it, we have to respond favorably to that.
And how much have housing costs increased in the last 10 years, roughly, would you say, particularly in the GTA?
They've gone through the roof, no pun intended. I mean, you've had a massive increase in costs. Like, in the city of Toronto, 1 year development charges were increased 43%, where in over a 10-year period, you had a DC that was $8,000 per unit, and it went up to $88,000 per unit. How can, consumers afford that increase? It's impossible.
And further to that, RBC Housing Affordability actually mentions that home ownership costs have increased about 54% in the last 10 years. So it's a serious situation here. So another question, though, how much of an average person's income goes towards mortgage payments?
Well, in Toronto, I think they've looked, the most recent numbers I saw were in the 60 percentile range, which is crazy. At one point in time, there were people that wanted to redefine affordability because it was so bad. The CMHC has had a longstanding measure that it shouldn't be more than a third of your income, basically. So we're way out of whack. And even though prices have come down, we still are facing other things, like we've had increased construction costs and so on. So, rates are obviously important. But, the bottom line is
Thank
that
you, Mr. Lyle. If you could just wrap up for this round of questioning very briefly.
I was just going to say the bottom line is the tax issue is the most important thing right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kobina. I'll go over to Mr. Sawatsky. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us today. Ms. Keesmaat, you've been clear that Canada's housing system isn't working for an entire generation of young people who are now shut out of home ownership. So as the committee studies Bill C-4, we're looking at measures like the GST relief on new homes, the creation of Build Canada Homes Agency, which aim to make it possible to build and buy the kinds of entry-level homes that people need. So given your experience aligning policy, planning, and market incentives, I'd like to explore how these changes could help with pathways for younger Canadians to enter the housing market. You've often said that our housing funding model has been broken for years. So how does removing the GST on new homes under $1 million and reducing it on builds up to $1.5 million help rebalance project economics so builders can produce entry-level, attainable homes that families actually need?
Thank you very much for the question. One of the strange things that's happened over the course of the past several years is that, of course, we've moved into a high interest rate environment. And during COVID, we went into a supercharged environment in terms of the cost to construct. Every cost went up. Now there's uncertainty around costs because of tariffs. And what that's done is it's introduced a tremendous amount of uncertainty in addition to additional new costs. We find ourselves in a very strange situation because whereas several years ago, development projects could in fact tolerate these types of charges. And in fact, when I was chief planner in the city of Toronto, I'm very proud of the fact that we frequently secured things like new community centers and new parks as a part of a development approval. That is no longer a viable model. It's no longer sustainable. The cost of borrowing is too high and the cost of constructing is too high. So we need to fundamentally recalibrate housing delivery. And importantly, myself and many others in the GTA, we have sites where even if we zero out the cost of land in a development, it is still not a viable project, given the cost to borrow for construction and given the cost of actually building the home. So what that means is we need a fundamentally new model for how we deliver. And it does start with eliminating these taxes and costs that projects could bear 5 or 10 years ago, but that projects can no longer bear in this current environment. It also means, and I think Canada Builds Homes is an excellent example of this, that we need to look at using public land in a fundamentally different way. At the very least, we need to zero out land in our pro formas, in addition to getting rid of a whole series of onerous costs. When we do that, we can begin to piece together viable developments that do build homes for new Canadians. And we have a great example on our Merton project, where the land was contributed by the City of Toronto. It was assembled with some of our land, and as a result, we are building 30% of that housing is deeply affordable. We're building 450 new homes, and that went to market that what got approved in an expedited process and is being built in this existing market. So it's a really big clue, and I think it builds on many of the principles that you see in Build Canada Homes.
Thank you. And do you see the GST reduction as a practical incentive that will accelerate new builds?
It's a piece of a puzzle. There's a whole variety of pieces that we're working on. There's no golden goose. There's no one way to fix housing delivery. There's no one way to fix a pro forma. And I spend a lot of my time with my financial team looking at our various sites and our projects and figuring out what the trigger points are that can tip a project into viability. And sometimes it's a bit of reducing the parking, a shortened approvals timeline. On rental buildings, for sure, the GST forgiveness on rental buildings has been absolutely critical for rental buildings. So it's a piece of a larger puzzle. But right now, there's a lot that we need to eliminate, including DCs, in order to start getting more projects. Not all of them will become viable as a result of these changes, but some will, and that's what we need to work towards.
Thank you. And do you think a national GST rebate will signal to the private sector that the federal government is more serious about creating the conditions to build?
I think that's true. I think every move that's made has a positive implication. But I'll just like to say that I also do that it should not just for first-time home buyers, but any primary residents, I think is an important amendment that would have a bigger impact on movement within the housing system. Many people, I'm in this category myself, I'm an empty nester. I still live in the home that I raised my children in, but between the land transfer tax, the cost of GST on a new home, it's really a disincentive to me downsizing into a more right-sized home. And if I did so, I would, of course, be freeing up a home for a young family. So I think looking at the entire housing system and removing the GST on any primary residence is really critical.
You have about 30 seconds.
Just one last question. You mentioned lowering DCs. Do you happen to have any suggestions or recommendations of what a path forward with that could be?
I do. The federal government has signaled that they're interested in doing so. I think it's critical for the government to act very quickly and make it clear to municipalities that they will make them whole for any project within the next 2 or 3 years that is shovel ready, shovel in the ground. It won't be perfect. As we know, different municipalities have different
Thank you,
DCs.
Ms. Keesmaat. We're going to have to end it there. Thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. Monsieur Garon, vous avez 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Lyle, I'll start with you. The equivalent of the counterpart of your organization in Quebec is L'Espinal SHQ, and it is dealing with the refund for GST on new builds. For first-time home buyers, rather. They explained to us that this came about in March, but then there was the election campaign, and then there was a motion that was moved here in Parliament. So the GST refunds for contracts were refunded for those contracts signed on May 27. But that program existed already, and people started to sign contracts to buy new homes. Do you think it would be a good thing that the government would move that so important date from May to March? backdate it to March when contracts were signed?
I certainly wouldn't have any objection to that happening. And I think, if you look at it in fairness, because people aren't really that conversant on some of these tax issues and how they apply and the dates and whatever. So if you heard that, you may have gone ahead thinking, oh, I'm going to get a tax rebate here, but then it didn't happen because the date was May 27th. I mean, saying that, I also accept the fact that setting those dates is a difficult choice because you're drawing a line in the sand somewhere. But if they were to move it back, I wouldn't have an objection to that. Personally, I mean, I think it's kind of fair.
Et au sein de votre industrie, est-ce que vous
And in your industry, has it ever happened that you've heard from entrepreneurs or builders that some of their clients learned too late that the refund that they thought they were going to be given wouldn't happen, or that their purchase did not qualify for the GST refund?
Well, I wouldn't say that specifically, yes. I mean, well, yes, but the bigger issue has been, the alignment with the province. And we've had repeated calls, our members, with respect to when can I get it and what does it cover? And, we had said, well, the province will be acting on this, but that hasn't happened yet. So there's some challenges around this, but this is the difficulty, I think, in our country with the alignment of policies between the various levels of government. And that, of course, raises questions of accountability, which are so important. But on housing, I think your point is that we need clarity, and, there has to be some consideration given to some people, some buyers not really understanding the system.
Vous parlez à un indépendantiste québécois, je suis tout à fait...
You know, I'm a Quebec independent, and I quite agree that we're 100% in agreement with what you have just said. But what was done in Quebec that is of note. Do you have an assessment of the supplementary costs that would be incurred if it had been made earlier? Would it cost the federal government more to move it back?
I think one estimate I saw was something in the range of $60 million. And then, of course, there's also been estimates of extending the GST break to move up buyers and, the downsizers and things like that. Those numbers have been calculated as well, both at the provincial and federal level. But I think, specifically to your question, I think it was about $60 million.
Merci. Madame la Présidente, je me suis perdu dans mes trucs. Combien de temps il me reste?
How much time, Madam Chair, do I have left? I lost track. Almost 2 minutes. I asked, I want a question from Madam Kismat. There are a variety of programs which allow first-time home buyers to purchase. There are prices that are set that are quite high, but nonetheless, CMHC has noted that since the pandemic, amongst this group of young first-time buyers, money is coming from their family, from the parents, from the grandparents. Those young people have that type of capital, are privileged, but then there are other young people who come from more modest background, and they don't have this type of money to put forward. The Bloc Québécois, during the campaign, would like to have seen an interest-free loan from the federal government to allow these less fortunate young people, to allow them to buy a home. Because, it's not everybody whose parents or grandparents is going to pony up the money to help.
Thank you very much for the question. The challenge with any time where you're actually helping people on the demand side and putting money in their pocket is that the cost of housing is in fact increasing. So I think the only solution is a supply side, more supply, and building more affordable housing that is targeted specifically to young people. Our Merton project is a good example of this. Some of those 30% affordable units, there's about 150 of them, will be at 50% below market rent.
Thank you,
Putting
Ms.
more money in
Keesmaat.
people's
I'm
pockets
sorry, I'm
drives
gonna
up
have
the cost
to,
of the home.
Yeah, move on to the next round of questioning. Mr. Kelly, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lyle, in your opening statement and in your responses to earlier questions, you've mentioned more than once taxes being the obstacle or the principal driver of perhaps of the cost of housing, of which the GST is one, and we do support the removal of it. We agree with you that that the government could have chosen to go further. What about other taxes, like there's an industrial carbon tax that affects the cost of producing raw materials. We have also, if you want to talk more about development charges, that the committee, I think, would like to hear some more details about how taxes make housing more expensive.
Sure. I'll start with DCs first. Development charges basically became, certainly in Ontario, a runaway train. Now there are some disciplines being imposed on it, most recently by the Ontario legislature with Bill 17 in Ontario. But still, it's an issue. And, they rose dramatically without real justification. There needs to be a new system in order to support growth-related infrastructure and things like that, aligning the three levels of government. There are some measures there that are being contemplated. I mean, I like Alberta's attitude myself, which is, your Alberta's Minister of Municipal Affairs, Williams, is, as they've said, housing is priority one. All other considerations are secondary. So within the context of that, any kind of taxes, including carbon taxes, I can't, in principle, sort of support relative to that number one priority for housing supply, because it's so fundamental to all of so many needs, whether it's healthcare, education, our ability to compete with the U.S., and so, yeah, I'm all in favor of cutting taxes on new housing, whatever they are.
So the industrial carbon tax, for example, is yet another example of how taxes, in this case, one completely under federal jurisdiction, makes housing more expensive.
To the extent that it drives up the cost of housing, yeah, I'd support, that proposition.
You mentioned in your opening statement that a number of municipalities got an F for their contribution to the cost of housing in the form of policies that hinder development and cater to I guess the NIMBYism within their jurisdictions. Can you gave one example of I think the City of Toronto going from I'm not sure if it was the City of Toronto, I think it was, you said going from 8,000 to 88,000 a unit. Can you give some other examples just so that the committee has concrete numbers that Canadians can really get their head around for just how much government adds to the cost of a home?
Yeah, so for example, in the GTA, and I'd be happy to provide further information after this session if required, we've looked at different municipalities. Some have adjusted, like, the City of Vaughan, Mayor Del Duca recently cut their DCs in half. They're still quite high, but at least that measure was taken because, we weren't selling anything anyways. You had nothing to lose. Mayor Parrish in Mississauga, for example, the great city of Mississauga, came up with, produced a great housing plan and cut their DCs as well. Some municipalities didn't jack up their DCs to the extent, in fact, I've received calls from them saying, hey, we're pretty good. And they were. I mean, they didn't get carried away with this stuff. I think that's one of the problems, though, is that you've got this sort of herky-jerky differences between different municipalities. And this is where, again, I like the Alberta approach, which is to say that, If a municipality is way out of line, the government's going to step in because municipalities are creatures of the province, and we need that kind of standardized approach across our provinces.
I don't know if I don't think I really have time for a question, but I'm just going to ask then the witness to perhaps table the information that he had mentioned he has access to that could give more information to the committee.
Great, thank you, Mr. Kelly. Right on time. Mr. Letao.
Je vois que Monsieur Cape.
I see Mr. Cape is back with us. But before going to Mr. Cape, I'd like to thank Ms. Kismat and Mr. Lyle.
Over and over again, that this issue really is a supply issue. It's a supply side issue. What we have to make sure is that we find ways to build as much as we can and as fast as we can. Measures that only work on the demand side, in fact, likely be counterproductive at this stage. But my question, Mr. Cape, and thank you for being back, in this context of having to work hard on accelerating construction, how do you view, or what do you think the role is for non-market housing? You mentioned the Swedish example. How do you view that as being appropriate for Canada at this time? I mean, we've done it before after the Second World War, but non-market housing, how can we accelerate that?
Well, thank you. Yes, and I apologize for my technical difficulties here. I guess something went down in the neighborhood, but we're back up. Yeah, the non-market housing, the critical importance of affordable housing in Canada has never been more pronounced. It's a challenge right now that is being felt around the world in different communities, but here in Canada it seems to be particularly important and stressed. The various not-for-profit organizations that are leading in this space in different communities across the country all have strategies and a high degree of capability to operationalize the delivery of and the maintenance of and the management of affordable housing programs. For us in Canada, though, our focus as a company has been working with not-for-profit agencies. We've been working with 4 Indigenous organizations and I think 4 or 5 different not-for-profits in the GTHA. And each and every one of them is looking to, massively increase the availability of their particular solution in their communities. The question you're asking, I think, is more regarding how do we create higher degree of affordability? Is that what you're really getting at?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. So it's an enormously complex question with more than one particular tax solution required. So obviously the removal of or the GST relief being proposed is important in the mix. But there's a larger supply chain network that needs to be designed. There are critically important investments required at all levels of government to try to incentivize different ways of building in Canada. The modular focus, the idea of increased levels of completion off-site in factories has proven to be dramatically successful in Japan and Northern Europe, with a particular focus in Sweden, where over 90% of all housing is produced off-site in fabrication facilities, producing a higher quality product much more quickly and at a lower cost. We believe that Canada has all of the ingredients to make the same success, if not globally lead in that particular space. There have been challenges, of course, in trying to roll out affordable housing programs related to modular housing and industrialized construction. These ideas have been tried over the last five decades or more. Uniquely right now, though, technology infrastructure is being designed, whether it's digital platforms and digital innovations, or in the realm of robotics and machine learning, as well as supply chain development and policy integration. All of these things are beginning to coordinate to create a unique opportunity right now for these efficiencies to be properly put together by companies like ours at Assembly, but across the country in different communities. And the opportunity for faster builds, higher quality builds, and lower cost production of housing with a focus on affordable is real. There's no doubt in my mind that the the Build Canada Homes initiative that was announced by the Prime Minister and by the Housing Infrastructure Minister on the 14th of September is heading in the right direction. That type of investment is not just about affordable housing, but also about building an industry in Canada. Economic development is the kind of parallel opportunity for that particular focus of Build Canada Homes. I'll leave it at that unless I can ask. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes,
Thank you,
indeed.
Mr. Letao. You have about 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monsieur Letao. Thank you, Mr. Cape. Monsieur Garon, vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Garon. Thank you very much, Chair. Once again, to the witnesses for being with us today. Since we don't have much time, I'm going to ask an open question. We've talked a lot about the crisis of affordability and measures being put in place to allow first-time home buyers to buy a home. Ms. Kismet talked about unity and the possibility of lower than market prices. But if I look at the metropolitan Montreal area, it's clear that there are a lot of people who, even with all those measures, are still going to remain in the street. They can't attain housing, despite the fact that there are private industry builders that would try to help. But let me turn to social housing, where there are municipal offices for social housing to try to help out to attenuate the situation. Is that a possibility to provide housing that would be lower than market price? Is there any one of the witnesses who would like to speak to this issue?
I'm happy to speak to this issue. One of the ways that we're delivering social level housing and have been in the Toronto context for the past almost 25 years now has been through partnerships with the private sector. So almost every social level housing, so that level of affordability, has been integrated into a market development, and there's been a subsidy provided by either the municipality or the province, or in some instances through CMHC in the Affordable Housing Fund, that has deepened the level of affordability. And I believe that one of the reasons this has been done is because on an international scale, we see that mixing deeply affordable housing into market housing is a more socially sustainable way to do so. It's more likely that people will be lifted in poverty over time. Whereas the 1960s model of affordable housing, where we built large developments of deeply social housing, and this is absolutely true in the Toronto context as well, they have become places where people have become trapped in poverty intergenerationally. And we still have those communities, and they are a real struggle. And we've been trying to turn them into mixed income communities. So this model of integrating
Ms.
deeply
Kismet,
affordable
could I just
housing
ask
into
you to
housing
wrap up your
works.
thoughts, please?
Yeah. So that's a model that works.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Colleagues, seeing the time, we don't have enough time for another full round of questions. Allez-y.
J'imagine que vous étiez en train
Imagine that you were starting to announce that we had finished the question period. I have a point of order that I'd like to bring up. All right.
Wrap up questions here. I just want to say a big thank you to our witnesses for coming today. We really appreciate your time and your preparation, and I appreciate colleagues and their excellent questions. Okay, appel de règlement. Merci.
Loin de moi l'idée de ne pas vouloir remercier les témoins.
Of course, I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. But I do have a point of order. The Minister of Finance, in several instances, referred to the committee. In the Finance Committee in previous legislation would have asked the Minister of Finance to change the budgetary cycle. Could the Minister please table any document he has with respect to that so that we can have it for future reference?
Of order, but if you are asking the committee to look into that.
J'aimerais que vous fassiez, si vous l'acceptez, que vous fassiez.
Would you agree to make that request of the minister, those documents that he referred to in his interventions today.
Your turn, Bill.
Have some clarity. I think it was a previous OGO report, actually, that perhaps the minister was referring to. So that's the Operations Committee.
Et si c'est le cas, il n'en demeure pas moins.
If
que
it's
peu
the
importe-
case, nonetheless, it doesn't matter which committee is involved. We could it could still be of use for us. I know that the minister was very happy and very enthusiastic. We can use his own words.
I did want to mention very quickly is that all committee members received 2 budget requests on Friday that were circulated, and I was hoping that we could approve both of those. So the first is with regards to Bill C4. The amount requested was $13,400, and for the study on the 2025-2026 budgetary cycle, the amount requested was $2,750. Can we approve those amounts? Okay, thank you so much. Monsieur Garon?
J'ai une dernière question pour vous. J'en ferai
A
pas un
last
appel au règlement
question.
parce que je
I'm not
présume
going to
ça se
make it
qualifie.
a point of order because I know it isn't. But could the clerk obtain an agenda of the next meetings, of the coming meetings of our committee, so we know where and what we're doing? Yes, we'll do our best.
To adjourn the meeting? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. Take care.